So, if we could just start with like maybe you telling us a little bit about A, what it means to go to school as a composer.
Okay.
And B, where in your journey do you feel like sound as, where does this influence come from, like John Cage, looking at sound and maybe music or whatever language we want to put on this, where all of a sudden sound takes on some other quality that we might call art.
So are we rolling?
We are rolling.
Oh, okay.
Which don't, make
okay. I actually first started composition when I was around 16. I wrote a choral piece for our high school choir, which was performed. Probably the biggest audience I've had to date. But from there, I applied to Interlochen Arts Academy and went to Interlochen, which is a full-time school, live-in school in northern Michigan. And there, I went to be a concert pianist. That was kind of my dream, to be a concert pianist. And when I got into my piano lessons class, there was one guy who was younger than me, who'd been touring. I think he was a freshman. He'd been touring with a concert orchestra already. And that kind of lowered my expectations a little bit, because that I didn't think I was ever going to reach that level that he was at already. And so at that point, I switched my interest to my major to composition. So I was actually doing composition in my junior and senior years in high school. And from there, after I graduated high school, I kind of went a different direction. And it wasn't really until my wife and I had gotten married and we were living in California. This was now 2001. So this is 20 years after I graduated high school. And I've been leading like a Christian rock band, playing in a Christian rock band, leading worship music and stuff like that. But it wasn't satisfying. It really wasn't what I wanted to be doing. So I went back to school at Cal State Fullerton and got a master's in music composition. And that was hard because I'm there, obviously much older than everybody else, and everyone else who's in the program, they're in their 20s or whatever like that, and I'm not in my 20s.
Yeah.
So, but what I forgot to mention in that gap was I got a PhD in linguistics. So I went back to school, I went on in college, I got a PhD in linguistics. And the linguistics really was like another sound language to me. So with the music and the listening to foreign languages and dissecting the sounds, because I spent a lot of time dissecting little bits of spoken language and stuff like that. So that got into my head. And then the first semester that I was at Cal State Fullerton, 9/11 happened. And that gave me an idea for a piece. And the piece was a choral piece where each person in the choir, there were 16 voices, had an individual part. more like an orchestra. And their parts consisted of consonants and vowels broken up into pieces. And they were singing that. And that piece is called 57-1. You can find it on YouTube. And that was kind of where it started.
Yeah.
And that was really, I was surprised how well the piece came out, and that the students at Cal State Fullerton were actually able to perform it. And they found it interesting. And then I got it recorded by the Kiev Chamber Choir in 2006, which is a spotless, incredible recording. But at that point, and then there was another piece that I did also at Cal State Fullerton called the Beatitudes. And in the Beatitudes, I recorded 6 different speakers in 6 different languages reading the Beatitudes. And then I took that recorded information and cut it up into pieces on a tape. A lot of times it's called tape music. And use that for a recording too. It's about 10 minutes in length. It's also on YouTube. But that work, because you can do so much with the programs where you can manipulate sound and cut sound. And you can take a little bit of a vowel and stretch it out, and you have pitch. It automatically comes with a pitch. But then you can change the pitch. So I used that information to sing this very old chorale. And it's really eerie sounding when you hear it being sung. And those were my first real intersections between music and language. And that's really kind of where it all started.
Interesting. Very interesting. And so then, was there a point where the human being or the object themselves, or did you start thinking about them as instruments as well?
I have influence from John Cage, and his piece, I think it's 4 minutes and 33 seconds. Is that correct? So 4 minutes and 13 seconds.
I keep saying it's 23, but
I think it's 4 minutes and 33 seconds. Which is a silent piece where the pianist goes up to the piano and there's 3 movements written on the score. And it says tacit, 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 which means you're quiet. So, and everybody, thinks it's a joke, right? Because he's not doing anything. He lifts up the lid, he's quiet for 2 minutes, closes the lid, lifts it again, quiet for 2 minutes. This is one of the most pieces that's been made fun of by the most people. But John Cage, what was in his mind wasn't the joke of it. What was in his mind was what people were hearing while that piece was going on. So it's not the silence, but it's actually all these little twitters and laughter and cars going by outside, which is what's supposed to be the music.
And almost, if like you said, one of the more commented and made fun of pieces out there, almost like you get to hear the sound of arrogance as well, and you get to hear the sound of some of these bigger human things.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. And John Cage figures directly into this work because I think it was around 1944 he created what's called, or invented what's called, the prepared piano. And the prepared piano is, he took a grand piano and took mutes, screws, nails, all sorts of things that he inserted in between the strings of the piano, so that when you played the notes, you get more of a, more of a percussion instrument, where you're getting funk, thing, ding, thing, and harmonics when you place the mutes in the right place, stuff like that. And so I incorporated the prepared piano in this piece too, that has, the sounds are digitized. They're from a piano that was prepared and recorded for each note.
Sure.
And that kind of figures into this piece as well. When you hear the piano, it's the prepared piano that you're listening to.
Awesome. And then, will you talk to us a little bit about where the actual language comes from and inspiration, and who, and I mean, I realize there's a lot going on here, but maybe some like broad strokes of who and why.
In the main text is by Ernesto Cardinal, and he was born in 1925 and actually just died in last March. He was 95. And in 2013, my wife took a class down to Costa Rica, where our family spent a whole semester in Costa Rica. And part of that trip were trips to Cuba and to Nicaragua. And while we were in Nicaragua, we got to meet Ernesto Cardinal.
Wow.
And our son got to ask him a question. It was pretty fun.
Yeah.
I did too, but it didn't really go anywhere. But Brendan and me both had pictures with him.
Oh, wow.
Photos with him. And somehow my wife missed out on it, and she's kind of upset. And we also have a signed book by him. So that's pretty great.
Yeah.
Ernesto Cardinal was a priest. He was an apologist writer. He was a poet. He was one of the people who were involved in the fighting against the Somoza regime in the Nicaraguan revolutionary times. He was, I forget which pope did it, took away his credentials of being a priest. Then Pope Francis restored it a couple years ago. And he, his voice as a poet is really kind of wonderful. And I found this poem called Coplas a la Muerte de Merton, which was written after Thomas Merton died unexpectedly. He was at a conference in Thailand, and he got electrocuted in his room by a fan.
Oh, jeez.
Yeah. And he wrote this really long poem on Merton's death. And I had been a fan of Thomas Merton also, reading his work. He was a monk and a very accomplished writer. He did writing of a lot of poetry, a lot of writing about culture. And the connection is that, so Merton was a priest at Gethsemane, Kentucky. And basically you live there, that's where your whole life is. You don't get to go out unless you have permission and stuff like that. But Cardinal came up to Gethsemane to study, to become a priest. And Merton was the one who was his teacher. And I don't know what their relationship was while they were there together, but after they left, Cardinal had invited Merton to come down to Nicaragua and spend time down there. And he always wrote about wanting to go to Nicaragua and spend time down there. He never made it, but that was one of the things he had written about. So they formed this relationship with each other. And when he died, this, I guess, he was pretty young, and it was a big surprise to Cardinal, and that's where the poem came from.
Okay.
And let me read the first couple lines of it.
Please do.
Nuestras vidas son los ríos que van a dar a la muerte, que es la vida. And the translation is, our lives are like rivers that run empty into death. That is life. And I just thought that was a really fitting, calling the piece Que van a dar a la muerte, kind of like a fitting picture. I really like the imagery of the river running itself basically to death into the ocean.
Yeah.
And that's what life is.
Running to death.
Yep. So the connections with the other pieces, there's two works, epigrams and Gethsemane, Kentucky, which are works that were written by Ernesto Cardinal. Gethsemane, Kentucky talks about his time when he was at the monastery at Gethsemane. And then the epigrams talk more about the in Nicaragua, what it was like to live in Nicaragua under the Somoza regime. But these works, the form that we're using these works, were translated by Thomas Merton into English.
Okay.
So there's the connection there.
Sure.
The other work, selected poems from Barbara Kingsolver in her book called Another America. A lot of that whole book of poems concentrates on Latin America. And it concentrates on good things, it concentrates on violence towards women, it talks about the music, but a lot of it, in one poem though called The Monster's Belly, which I use in this one, she talks about how they were hiding under their desks, because of the Cuban Missile Crisis. And that she realized, I guess, as she became an adult, that she lived close enough to the monastery that she could have walked there on her own.
Wow.
And met Cardinal.
Wow.
So they all have this kind of interlinking relationship with one another, and it was, I don't know, I was kind of surprised to find those linkages and said, oh, this stuff needs to go together.
Yeah. And
this was actually, I've had this material probably since 2014, 2015. I mean, I've had it a long time. Yeah. And it's been mulling around and then trying to figure out how to fit it all together into a script, and and then I sat on it for a couple of years. Yeah. Until I figured out what I wanted to go with it.
So then, if you've been sitting on this material since 2014, but you've been gathering it over many years. Mm-hmm. What was it about the pandemic that encouraged you, or whatever the word is that you want to insert here?
Yeah.
To wrap your mind around.
What was the impetus?
Yeah. Just turn this way a little bit.
Part of it was making the decision that I just wanted to get it recorded. Yeah. I had originally looked at having the putting the text to music and having it sung. And I tried a few things with that and didn't like where that was going. I thought about recording it, but then distorting it, like I've distorted a lot of my other pieces, or using the text and the speech itself, the recorded speech in different ways. But then I started thinking about what I had at hand, and what I have at hand is not any other people that can really help with this. And I wanted to get it performed. And so I started thinking about what do I need to do to make it so that it can basically just be out there and perform itself. And so I thought about the idea of recording things around the house just for sounding purposes, pots and pans, glasses, bowls, wooden boards, things like that. And then using a prepared piano, which to me, that was part of the idea that it's not just, the information isn't just the semantics of it. The information is the sound that you're listening to. And so for the prepared piano, I determined everything that's in the prepared piano by rolling dice. So I rolled dice out of, and this is also influenced by my son and his Dungeons and Dragons dice. So I rolled, dice to determine 1 through 88, what key on the piano is it. Then I rolled a dice, how long is that note? So I made a determination of, I think 9 different lengths. How long is it going to be? And then I made a determination of how loud is it going to be, and rolled dice to determine that. So the whole piano score was determined that way. So it was totally random.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's amazing. Then it's so fitting that it makes a lot of sense to me all of a sudden why you were able to cut loose of a little bit of control on the voices, because that's the piece, the randomness is the piece.
Right.
In a lot of ways. I mean,
and in the recording of the found objects. So I had a track for each found object or set of found objects that I was recording. And once I finished those, it's like, well, what do I want to do with these now that I've recorded? And what I ended up doing was I put each of the found objects on a different track, because that's the way they were recorded. But then I edited noise out that I didn't want, but then I just spread them across the time space that I had, and didn't change, I didn't say, well, I like this better over here, or this better over here. I just let them be where they were, other than putting silence in between to have them fill up the canvas. Basically.
Fascinating. And in doing that, let me ask it this way. Do you feel like as a composer that there's potentially always I don't want to just say happy accident, but a happy accident that happens, and when you go to sit down and think about this stuff, and obviously you put a tremendous amount of thought into the individual parts of this, but when you sit down and you're just like, okay, I'm gonna start putting this thing together, what's a jump off point for you? Is it like in this case where you said, I'm gonna set this piece of time, and the piece of time is gonna be my kind of light post here? Or do you do that a lot? Do you do
Can you rephrase it? I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I'm sorry. It's a complicated question. It's not. Here's why I'm asking this. A lot of times when I'm talking to students, and they're like, "I'm going to do this," and they'll describe this very complicated scenario, and you can already imagine it's going to be amazing. There's all these incredible parts, but they have the hardest time getting going because they'll have set a bunch of things in front of them where they're like, "I can't start until this." What seems so striking to me about this work is that, like you said, tons of the pieces that you would have normally tried to put into place simply weren't there.
Yeah.
And so what allowed you the freedom, do you think, to just start?
I think the first thing that I did was, after I recorded everything, I cut everything up and laid it out in the script that I had made. And I saw how much time that took up. It didn't take up as much time as I thought it would.
Yeah.
I was thinking, well, it's got to be 20 minutes to read all this stuff, but it wasn't. It's only like 10 minutes or something like that.
Oh, to read the actual
just from
stuff. Yeah.
beginning to end.
Yeah.
And it's like, that's not, it's not nearly as much time as I thought it was. So there's like this conundrum. Okay, what am I going to do?
Yeah, yeah.
It's not the time frame that I was looking at.
Yeah.
So I think the next step was really the prepared piano.
Uh-huh.
And I decided, well, I need at least 10 minutes.
Sure.
Of randomness.
Some through line of randomness.
Yeah. So I did 10 minutes of the piano, and then I decided that still wasn't enough, and I flipped them so that they're basically mirror images of one another.
Just going the other way. Yeah.
And then on top of that, then the piano is reversed against itself.
Sure.
So you're hearing it in reverse, and the same thing with the found objects.
Yeah.
That has a reverse track too.
You're hearing forward, mirror, forward, then you're hearing reverse and mirror and reverse.
Yeah.
Stacked.
Yeah. Yeah. And that was my canvas.
Yeah.
And that's once that canvas was laid out, it was much easier than to just start. Okay, this is it. I'm just putting
I'll
it
say,
together.
just from my limited amount of work on it, like once those pieces, like I said, when I was messing with the voices, it was one thing, and I was like, this is, I had problems with it. I didn't necessarily have problems with it, but there was problems, and as soon as that thread got laid of the music, I was just like, the randomness fills in every gap, and so, it's just not worth beating up like, this is overloaded.
And part when you're listening to something like that, especially if it's in a language you don't understand.
Yeah.
The first impulse is to tune out.
Yeah.
Because you don't understand what they're saying.
Yeah.
Your impulse isn't to listen to, how pretty that is, or just think of what that language sounds like apart from any meaning or semantics that's attached to it.
Yeah.
Say, what a pretty language.
Yeah.
A lot of people can identify languages.
Sure.
A lot of times and not understand a word.
Yeah, sure. Yeah. No, I feel like I'm that way, honestly.
Yeah.
Like I've traveled a lot. I barely speak a little bit of Spanish, but I can definitely tell you what, not a lot. But
so that was part of the impetus is this, let's just take it at its face value.
Sure.
And just put it on this canvas.
Here's the object.
Yeah.
Awesome. I do not know who is out in the snow. All that is seen in the snow is his white habit. No husband on room at all. Only the plain white sunlit snow. A novice in the snow is barely visible. And I feel that there is something
my
more
growing years, I
the
practiced sleeping
snow
under my desk to survive the rains and shooting bombs. I learned to kneel on a splintered floor, arm fervor of God forgive me for the wars and tortured me. Pray to God that the communists would come to start. Now, Father Ernesto, I find you were there all along, with the monks of Gethsemane, Kentucky. I could have walked there in my worn shoes. I could have visited you and your laughing Lord, who made the best rain fall on me and love. What a difference to have known this Lord, or at least to know he shared the eternal sky with mine, who promised only that the horned and headed monster would come out of the sea for the purpose of ending the world. In your dark shirt,